Publishers are extremely smart. They did not get to where they are by accident. They spot trends and they create them before anyone else. They know what will be hot next year before anyone else. If they see something working, they won't announce it, but they'll be looking for it. So how do you know what's working for them? I used to spy with iTunes, really liked using iTunes on the Mac before Apple made their changes. Now, you can't use iTunes to look at the App Store. So now I use App Annie, and it's pretty simple. I'm going to walk you through it now. So the first thing you want to do is search a publisher's game on App Annie. Now, you don't want to search for the publisher. I can't find it that way, which is really weird. But in this example, I know Pixelcraft was one of Absolute's most popular games, so I'm going to search that. So then I find Pixelcraft, and I can click right here on the left-hand side on Absolute Games to see all of that publisher's games. So now you can see their published games. But the problem is this is showing iOS and Android, and it's also sorted by the app name. So I can't really see what's most recent here. So I want to just see iPhone games. So the first thing I'm going to do is click on publishers over here. It's a little bit of a confusing word. It took me a second to figure this out. And when you do that, now you can choose the name of the publisher, Absolute Games LLC, under iOS. You can see the little iOS and the App Store link. When you click on that, you can now view only iOS published games. So now what you want to do is sort by release date. That way you're seeing the games in order. And then here we go. Now we have all of their most recent games listed in order by release date. Now what I would do is analyze this list and I would look for patterns. Now I've already done this. I'm not going to do this on this event. It would take too long, but I would click on each one, check it out, notice if it's portrait, landscape, and get some data on all of these games. So I'm immediately noticing something interesting here. 89% of these are free. So obviously Absolute recently is really focusing on free games. Also, I'm seeing some patterns here with art styles. 78% of these are illustrative art styles. Now we have one game here that's also minimal and one that's pixel. Now I know from experience that Absolute does sign all these types of games, but there's no question that recently they've been focusing on illustrative. And what about portrait versus landscape? When we check it out, 78% of these are portrait games. So this is some interesting data that we've collected here, guys. Now we know the majority of Absolute's recent games are free, illustrated, and in portrait orientation. So does this mean that Absolute will only sign this type of game? Of course not. They specifically told me that wasn't true. But we now know this is currently trending with Absolute, whether it's intentional or not. And data points like this can give you a competitive advantage. So here's another important note. All publishers are different. They all have their unique ecosystem. What works for one might not work for the other. What works for one might not work for the other. But the interesting thing is this. Most people don't do the research. Most people start making a game solely based on the fact that they just want to make a game. They don't think about what the publishers want. And if you can outthink the majority of other game creators, then your chances just went up tenfold that you can get signed. Also, to be clear, this is very light research. From this point, you would not stop researching. You would keep digging. You would now find out which of these recent games was most successful. You would find out how many downloads those recent successes had. Then you would build a list of qualities in these most successful games. And this list would be used during your game design process. As you can imagine, that's very different than how most people create games. It's important to note, each publisher, guys, will have at least slight deviations in what they sign. A game that's great for Absolute might not be great for Ketchup, and a game that's great for Ketchup might not be great for Fortify. Some games will have crossover appeal to multiple publishers and others will not. Each publisher has its own trends, and if you want to truly succeed in this, you need to know what works for each publisher.